Greetings and welcome once again to Ask the Pastor Bible Study Live. My name is Steve Margua, and I am broadcasting using a different app. I was using StreamYard, but now I've switched over to Restream, which is not my default because it seems like today they are having issues broadcasting from StreamYard. So I want to see if this is going to work. If it works, then we shall continue. If not, then we'll see what goes on. So I'm still waiting to see if this will work. I'm pretty sure it's working on YouTube, but I am not so certain about Facebook. So I can see somebody watching. And again, I'm going to ask, as you are out there, if you can alert me in the comment section on whether you are watching from YouTube or Facebook. That would be very good so that I can know if it is working, because unfortunately now I'm not able to monitor it as I usually do. I don't even know how the audio is coming through because I usually will able to look it up on my phone. But it seems like there is a challenge going on with Facebook today. So just give me a moment here once again, and I do apologize for the delay. It is quite unexpected. I just want to make sure that we actually have a good let's see. So just give me a moment here once again, and I okay. So it seems YouTube is working. Hi, Wellington Ortiz. Thank you for answering it, because I needed someone to at least tell me what's going on. It seems like we are having an issue broadcasting to Facebook, no matter which app we use, no matter which stream we use. So I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do the short version. So what I want to do here is to answer a very common question. See, whenever I go through showing people that the second coming biblically, scripturally, must take place in the first century during the lifetime of the disciples of Christ, during the lifetime of the 12. Once I go through the tens of scriptures, not 2, not 3, but tens of scriptures throughout the New Testament, and then I link it with the Old Testament, often what happens is that they say, well, if it is true that Jesus did come back as the scriptures clearly show that he was to come back in the first century, then how come nobody recorded it? How come nobody recognized it? How come nobody reported it? And I always retort back and say it was very well recorded. It was very well documented. The problem is that the church that came afterwards disbelieved the reports. Just like when Jesus came the first time, if you ask Jews, why is it that you don't believe that the Messiah of Israel has already come, as the Tanakh, the Old Testament, declares? Well, they say, well, it has not happened. We say, is it because it was not recorded? Well, it was not recorded. We say, what about the New Testament? Well, I don't read the New Testament. I don't believe the New Testament. So it's not that the records are not there. It's that people have disbelieved the records. So let me show you a few of these records, and hopefully you will see that the second coming is well documented. It's not a secret event. So now this is Josephus. So, and this is actually coming from my book, Understanding the End Times. This is page 47 of this book. From page 47, I have 3 whole pages, actually more than 3, 4 pages, showing the historical records of the second coming of Jesus. So I'm going to be reading from my book, and then I'm going to be showing you some other evidence. So having said this, having shown the scriptures, so in my book, I show the scriptures about the second coming, and then I say, having said this, let me hasten to demonstrate records from history of what was reported to have been seen. Let me reduce this zoom so that it's easily seen. Records of what was seen during this time. So, quote, I'm quoting Josephus's book. The report of Josephus, the great first century Jewish historian, that the Jewish rebels cried, the sun comes, or the sun cometh, during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in AD 70, has caused angst for many scholars. It has done so despite the fact that all the ancient manuscripts of Josephus's text of the Jewish war contain that very phrase. The passage at issue, as translated from Book 5, Chapter 6 of Josephus's Greek text by William Whiston, reads as follows, quote, now the stones that were cast by the Roman catapults during the siege of Jerusalem were of the weight of a talent and were carried 2 furlongs and further. As for the Jews, they at first watched the coming of the stone, for it was of a white color and could therefore not only be perceived by the great noise it made, but could be seen also before it came by its brightness. Accordingly, the watchmen that sat upon the towers gave them, that is the Jewish rebels, notice when the engine was let go, that is the siege engine, the catapults, and the stone came from it, and they cried aloud in their own country language, in their own Hebraic language, the sun cometh. So that those who are in its way stood off and threw themselves down upon the ground, by which means, and by their thus guarding themselves, the stone fell down and did no harm to them. But the Romans contrived how to prevent that by blackening the stone. An effective action by the Romans, by the way, who then could aim at them with success when the stone was not discerned beforehand, as it had been till then. And so they destroyed many of the Jews at one blow. Thus, James Stewart Russell, whose book I recommend, this is the book, it's called The Parousia, James Stewart Russell, written in the 1870s. So this, what I'm teaching here about the second coming being in 66 to 70 AD, is not a new doctrine. This is something that has been taught all the way as far back as the 2nd century. So thus, James Stewart Russell concludes it, and this is now James Stewart Russell's quotation, it seems highly probable that the Jewish rebels, when they saw the white mass of stone hurtling through the air, raised the ribald cry, the sun is coming, in mockery of the Christian hope of the parousia, that is Christ coming, to which they might trace a ludicrous resemblance in the strange appearance of the missile. This comes from an article called Christian City Data Forum, Christianity, the Sun Cometh. Now, it is profound, now this is my writing, it is profound that this record of Josephus, which is, which is repeated by James Stewart Russell in his book, it is profound that this record corresponds to what John wrote in the book of Revelation about what was to happen to the great city during the 7th bowl judgment. And this is what John wrote in the book of Revelation. And there fell upon men a great hail. Remember, hail is hailstones. So there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, from the sky. Every stone of the hail about the weight of 1 talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great. Revelation 16:21. Now, think about what is happening here. So Josephus is reporting what was actually seen. Josephus knows nothing of the book of Revelation as far as we know. But Josephus is simply reporting what actually, literally happened at Jerusalem in 70 AD. So Josephus says, and again I'll bring us back here, that here is a quotation by Josephus from his book. He says, this is book 5. So now the stones that were cast by the Roman catapults during the siege of Jerusalem. So I want you to think about it. So the Romans have surrounded Jerusalem. They have these huge machines that they put these round marble stones that are white in color. And when they release the machine, it does its thing and it casts the stones up into the sky. Not just one stone, they have many sieges. So they usually would release them at the same time, and all of a sudden there would be stones cast into the sky, and then when they reach the proper angle, then they would descend upon the city. So I want you to see what is seen. I want you to imagine what is seen from inside the city. What they see is white stones coming from every direction, huge stones, each of them weighing 1 talent, according to Josephus. And at first, when they would cast these stones, Josephus reports to us that the Jews at first watched the coming of the stones, and because they were white in color, like hailstones, they would shout, they would release a cry. It says right here that they would release a cry and they would say, "The sun cometh." So each stone was surnamed the sun. The sun cometh. Ben comes. Now, and James Stuart Russell, because the scholars have said, why is Josephus saying the Jews were saying the sun cometh? Why would they call the stones Ben? A sun. Bin. And it is because it is reported that the Christians, just before the war, had been constantly warning the Jews, the Son of Man is coming. The Son of Man is coming. The Son of Man is going to judge you. And so when the war started, the Jews thought the war was going to be short-lived, and the Jews thought they were going to win. So they were mocking the Christians by saying the Son cometh. However, they did not win because the Romans changed their tactic. They started painting the stones black, so that whenever they would cast the stones, especially at night and in the early mornings, the stone could not be seen coming. And so it would crush the Jews. It would destroy their positions. And indeed, we know from historical records, the Jews were utterly crushed. Now, the comparison here is Revelation 16, verse number 12, where John in Revelation reports that there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. How could Josephus confirm that when Josephus, apparently, according to Christian tradition, is writing 20 years before John, although that is not true? But Josephus had not read Revelation. Josephus is simply God's eyewitness. Josephus is simply God's eyewitness during the second coming of Christ. Because you have to understand that the second coming of Christ was not a physical coming of the physical Christ. Rather, it was a spiritual coming of the spiritual Christ through the Roman army, which was God's glorious way of judging nations all the way back from the Old Testament. Matthew 16:27 says the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father. And then he will judge every man according to what he has done. Truly, I say to you, there are some who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, the angels of God in the judgment of Jerusalem were the Roman army. The angels of God in the destruction of Jerusalem at the second coming was the Roman army. The glory of God was the majestic and very effective Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Now let's read a few more records. So that's not the only record that Josephus wrote. So the next record is from Josephus, and I quote again from Josephus, and he says, on the 21st day of the month of Artemisius, that is also called Iyar, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, fake news, were it not related by those who saw it. So, in other words, Josephus was there, but he's also recording the eyewitness accounts of many people. So he says, were it not that many people saw it, it would seem like a fable. And were it not for the events that followed it, being so considerable in nature as to deserve such signs to precede them. For before the sun setting, before the sunset. So this is Josephus reporting what happened in 66 AD before the war began. So he says, before sunset, during clear daylight, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and the surrounding of cities. So throughout the country of Judea, many people saw chariots in the air, in the clouds, before sunset, before it was dark. And they saw those chariots over many cities. So Josephus says, if it had not been reported by many people, this would seem like if it's a fake story. Now, that is in Josephus's The War of the Jews, book 6, chapter 5, section 3. Now, this same report is written by Tacitus, who is a Roman historian. So Tacitus recorded this. Prodigies had occurred. Prodigies are miracles. But their own expiation by the offering of victims or solemn vows is held to be unlawful by a nation which is the slave of superstition and the enemy of true belief. So Tacitus is a Roman writer. He is accusing the Jews of being non-believers. And he's saying, yes, miracles had occurred and sacrifices had been made, but these things were not believed by the people that saw them. So he says, in the sky, Tacitus reports, in the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict, of glittering armor, a sudden lightning flash from the clouds lit up the temple. The doors of the holy place abruptly opened. A superhuman voice was heard to declare that the gods were leaving the temple. And in the same instant came a rushing tumult of their departure. Few people placed a sinister interpretation upon this. The majority were convinced that the ancient scriptures of their priests, the ancient scriptures of the Jews, were alluded to, or the ancient scriptures of their priests alluded to the present as their very time when the Orient, when the Jews would triumph, and from Judea would go forth men destined to rule the world. So this is what Tacitus, the Roman historian, reports about these armies that were seen in the skies. So Tacitus is giving a general background of the history of the Jewish war and doesn't give a date for these events. Now Eusebius, who is the father of church history, writing in the 4th century, says this: for before the setting of the sun, chariots and armed troops were seen throughout the whole region in mid-air, wheeling through the clouds and encircling the cities. Also, Eusebius continues, so Eusebius's statement ends here where he says encircling the cities. Now, the next statement is by another historian called Hegesippus. Now, Hegesippus says, also after many days, a certain figure appeared of tremendous size. which many saw, just as the books of the Jews have disclosed. And before the setting of the sun, there were suddenly seen in the clouds chariots, and this is in page 393 of Hegesippus' book, and armed battle arrays, by which the cities of all Judea and its territories were invaded. This is Hegesippus chapter 44. Hegesippus is a church historian from the 2nd century. Now, the medieval Jewish historian, so this is much further down the line in the medieval times. The medieval Jewish historian, so this is not a Christian. The medieval Jewish historian Sefer Yosipon, writing about the war of 70 AD, expounds upon this angelic army in the sky of AD 66 of fire and horsemen, a great force flying across the sky near to the ground, coming against Jerusalem and all the land of Judea, all of them horses of fire and riders of fire. It is evident that very extraordinary things were seen in the skies above Israel, just as the scriptures had specified would take place. Apart from Eusebius and Hegesippus, the rest of those who write these records were not Christians and would not have had any interest in proving scriptures from a Christian point of view. The scriptures are consistent in declaring that the second coming was to take place in the generation of the apostles. It was to be a time of great judgment upon the Jewish nation and its religious order. History confirms that this did indeed take place and that the eyewitnesses did observe supernatural things that confirm what the scriptures affirm. I conclude this chapter with another challenge. Have you believed the Lord's testimony as laid out in the scripture and confirmed by history? If not, why not? So that is from page 47, 48, 49 of my book, Understanding the End Times. What does the Bible teach about the end? By myself, Stephen Magua. You can find this on Amazon and you can get those records there. Of course, you can get these records online yourself. In fact, what I'm about to do here is that I'm about to bring up this. This is our website. It is called patheos.com. And the title of it is Seven Signs of Josephus Reveal the End Times. 7 signs of Josephus reveal the end times of the end times destruction. So our only first-hand account of the Roman assault of the temple comes from the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, who was a former leader of the Jewish revolt who had surrendered to the Romans and had won favor from Vespasian, the emperor, the general at that time, but he became emperor later. In gratitude, Josephus took on Vespasian's family name Flavius as his own. Now, as an eyewitness of the destruction of Jerusalem, Josephus gives us a startling window into a series of 7 signs which God sent to the people of Jerusalem prior to their ultimate destruction in 70 AD. The 7 signs of Josephus. Josephus prefaces these signs by saying in his book, The Jewish War, quote, "Thus it was that the wretched people were deluded at that time by charlatans and pretended messengers of the deity of God, while they neither heeded nor believed in the manifest portents, that is, manifest miracles, that foretold the coming desolation. But as if thunderstruck and bereft of eyes and mind, they disregarded the plain warnings of God." So before I show you the 7 signs, I want you to consider very carefully what Josephus says here. He says, thus it was, the wretched people were deluded, were deceived at that time before the destruction of Jerusalem, and they were deluded by charlatans and by pretended messengers of deity. So the people of Jerusalem were greatly deceived by some people And that's why they refuse to believe the messages of God. What does Matthew 24 tell us? So Jesus, in Matthew 24, leaves the temple. He's going away. Remember, Josephus is reporting about the destruction of the temple. So Jesus, the disciples come to him, they point out to him the temple. They say, what about this temple? And Jesus says to them, you see, all this do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. So they want to know when this will happen. So they ask him privately, tell us, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? All three things happening together in conjunction with the temple. Jesus answered, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. So Jesus warned that before his coming, there would be great deception. Not only that, you get over here to verse number 11, and it says, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Notice what Josephus says. Josephus says, thus it was that these wretched people were deluded at that time by charlatans and pretended messengers of deity, fulfilling Jesus's words in Matthew 24. Remember, Josephus is not a Christian. He's not trying to fulfill Jesus's words. Not only that, verse number 24. In fact, verse 23, Jesus, Matthew 24. Thus, if anyone says to you, come, look, here is a Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. So Josephus says this took place just before the war. So now, what are the 7 signs that Josephus saw or reported? Here they are. Number 1, a sword in the sky. So there are 7 signs that Josephus records in his book. Quote, so it was when a star resembling a sword stood over the city of Jerusalem, and a comet which continued for a year in 66 AD. Keep in mind what the shape of a sword is, right? A sword is like that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to put it in there. But anyway, a sword looks like a cross. How closely a sword appears like a cross. If swords and crosses are similarly shaped, then perhaps this statement by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse was fulfilled by the sign of the sword in the sky. Matthew 24, again, verse number 30. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth or of the land will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Sign number 2. But well, before we go to sign number 2, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven is a reference to the judgment of Jerusalem, which was physically manifested in the Roman army, which surrounded the city and destroyed it. That's a sign of the Son of Man, because that's a sign of God in the Old Testament. Now, sign number 2, a bright light. Quote, again, Josephus. So again, when before the revolt and the commotion that led to the war, please note that the revolt and the commotion that led to the war, that is before the war, at that time, when the people were assembling for the feast of unleavened bread, Passover, on the 8th month, Xanthias, that is Nisan, at the 9th hour of the night, as 3 a.m. in the morning, so brilliant a light shone around the holy altar and the sanctuary of the temple that it seemed to be broad daylight at the darkest hour of the night. And this continued for half an hour. By the inexperienced, this was regarded as a good omen. But the sacred scribes, the Jews themselves, but by the sacred scribes, it was at once interpreted in accordance to what happened afterwards as a bad omen, as a judgment. Now, before I actually get out of that one, watch this. It says there, before the revolt, before the rebellion began that led to the war, before the rebellion that led to the war, that led to the destruction of the temple and the destruction of the city and the scattering of the people of Israel. Now watch what 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says. It will speak about the first one, about the false prophets. It says, 2 Thessalonians chapter number 2, verse 3. Let no one deceive you in any way. So Josephus said they were deceived by charlatans and false prophets. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day, that is the day of the Lord, will not come unless the rebellion comes first. Now, depending on whatever translation you're looking at, the word that is used here is rebellion or revolt. So, for that day will not come unless the revolt or the rebellion comes first. The rebellion is what led to the war. The war is what led to the destruction. Now, let's read the rest of the verse. For that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. So, do you see? Rebellion, man of lawlessness, destruction. That's exactly what Josephus tells us happened in 70 AD. So, when you come back to these signs, we're going to go to sign number 3. Sign number 3 that Josephus reports is that a cow gave birth to a lamb. A cow gives birth to the young one of a sheep. Can you imagine that? A cow is giving birth naturally. There's no cloning. There's no modern science. And it gives birth to a little lamb. So at the same feast, after the second sign, so during Passover and unleavened bread of 66 AD, after the great light that came at the altar, a cow that had been brought by someone, an Israelite, for sacrifice, gave birth just before it was to be killed to a lamb in the midst, in the court of the temple. So you can imagine what these people are going through when they saw that, right? Now, fourth sign, the eastern gate opens by itself. So the eastern gate of the inner court, it was made of brass. Remember, Jesus was supposed to come from the east. Throughout the Bible, Jesus comes from the east. So it says the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, it was made of brass and very massive, and when closed toward evening, it could scarcely be moved by 20 men. So it was a huge gate, and it had been fastened with brass locks. So it was fastened with iron-bound bars on each side. It had bolts which were sunk to a great depth into the threshold, consisting of a solid block of stone. This gate was observed at the 6th hour of the night. In other words, in the middle of the night, it was observed to have opened of its own accord. The watchmen of the temple, scared, of course, terrified, ran and they reported the matter to the captain. And he came and with difficulty succeeded in shutting it. So in other words, it was not a door a gate which was easily opened and shut. To close it required great strength. To open it required great strength, but it opened by itself. Now look at the commentary of Josephus. This again, to the uninitiated, seemed to be the best of omens, as they supposed that God had opened to them the gate of blessings. But the learned, the scribes, the older men, understood that the security of the temple was dissolving of its own accord, and that the opening of the gate meant a present to the enemy. Interpreting the portent means sign, as it is used in the Gospels, or interpreting the portent in their own minds as indicative of coming desolation. The fifth sign. Let's go to the fifth one. Armies in the sky. Now, this one I've already indicated earlier on, but I'm just going to read it just for continuity. So, again, not many days after the festival of the 21st day of Artemisium, the Jewish month of Iyar, which is the late springtime, there appeared a miraculous phenomenon passing belief. Indeed, what I'm about to relate, I imagine, would have been deemed a fable were it not for the narratives of eyewitnesses and for the subsequent calamities which deserves which deserved to be so signalized, to be signified, a great sign. For before sunset, throughout all the parts of the country of Judea, chariots were seen in the air and armed battalions hurtling through the clouds and encompassing the cities. I already showed that through my book, so I don't need to camp on that one. Let's go to verse number 6. Moreover, at that same feast, or at the feast which is called Pentecost. So this one is the one that comes after unleavened bread, 50 days later. At the feast called Pentecost in 66 AD, all 24 priests of them, upon entering the inner court of the temple by night, as was their custom in the discharge of their ministrations, reported that they were conscious. So this is something they experienced, that they were conscious first of a commotion and a din, that is a great noise inside the temple. Remember, the temple is supposed to be silent. Even all the way back from Kings, you cannot even cut the stones in the temple site. It has to be silent. It's God's presence. It's soberness. So they hear a great commotion and a great noise, and after that, they heard, the 24 of them singularly had a voice as of a host. Interesting how the Bible says, and I heard the voice as of a great multitude in Revelation. So they had a voice as of a great army saying, we are departing hence. We are departing from here. We are leaving this place. That's the voice they had. The Jews. These are not Christians. These are not people who are believing in Revelation. These are first century Jews who have rejected Jesus. They have rejected the apostles, but this is what they report they saw and heard just before the temple was destroyed. Who is this voice saying we are departing from here? I want to put it to you that this is God and his angels who used to occupy that temple all the way back from the time of Moses. And now God is finally moving to the new temple, the new heavens and the new earth temple, the church. Let's go to before we go to number 7, here's commentary. Isn't it interesting that on the day of Pentecost, exactly 33 years from the time that the gospel started in Jerusalem to the very day, this announcement and this sign occurred exactly 33 days. So this is 33 years, 66 AD from 30 AD. Now these people assume that that the day of Pentecost happened in 33 AD. I prefer the date of 30 AD. So it would be 36 years. But anyway, let's go to the 7th one. Finally, the 7th sign, the last prophet, Joshua. But a further potent sign was even more alarming. 4 years before the war, in the Feast of Tabernacles, in 62 AD, when the city was enjoying profound peace. Remember what the Bible says? Paul himself teaches in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when they are saying peace, destruction will fall upon them suddenly and they will not escape. So when the city was enjoying profound peace and prosperity, there came to the feast at which it was the custom of all the Jews to erect tabernacles to God, one Yeshua. Another way of saying Jesus or Yeshua, son of Ananias, a rude peasant who, standing in the temple, suddenly began to cry out, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and the sanctuary, a voice against the bridegroom and the bride, a voice against all the people. Day and night he went about all the alleys of Jerusalem with this cry on his lips. Some of the leading citizens, and that was the leaders, the political leaders, incensed at these ill-omened words, arrested the fellow and severely chastised him. And you remember the chastisement of the first century was being beaten with a cat of 9 tails, the whip that would rip your flesh off of your back, like the one they whipped Jesus with. So, but after being chastised, he, without a word on his own behalf, or for the private ear of those who smote him, he only continued his cries as before. Thereupon, the magistrates, supposing, as indeed was the case, that the man was under some supernatural impulse, brought him before the Roman governor. And there, although flayed to the bone with scourges, he neither sued for mercy nor shed a tear, but merely introducing the most mournful of variations into his ejaculations. It's not a dirty word. That is the words coming from his mouth, responded to each stroke of the scourge with, "Woe to Jerusalem." When Albinus, the Roman governor, asked him who he was and whence he was, where he came from, and why he uttered these cries, he answered him never a word. Just like Jesus never answered a never a word to Herod, but unceasingly reiterated his dirge, his lament, his funeral song over the city, until Albinus pronounced him a maniac and let him go. During the whole period up to the outbreak of the war. So for 4 years, remember this is 62 AD. So for 4 years, this man is going to repeat the same thing every day. During the whole period up to the outbreak of the war, he neither approached nor was seen talking to any of the citizens of Jerusalem. But daily, like a prayer, repeated his lament, "Woe to Jerusalem." He neither cast any of those who beat him from day to day, nor blessed those who offered him food. To all men, that melancholy presage was his one reply. His cries were loudest at the festivals, when most people are gathered in Jerusalem. For 7 years and 5 months, he continued his work. Can you imagine that? For 7 years and 5 months, every day, all day, this man surrounded Jerusalem with these cries of "Woe, woe, woe." His voice never flagging, nor his strength exhausted. 7 years and 5 months, until the siege in 70 AD. Having seen his presage verified, he found his rest. For while going his round and shouting in piercing tones from the wall, "Woe once more to the city and to the people and to the temple," he added a last word, "and woe to me also." A stone hurled from the ballista, from the catapults. Remember the catapults we talked about at the beginning of this broadcast? The stones that were being cast that weighed 1 talent. A stone hurled from the ballista struck and killed him on the spot, so that with those ominous words still on his lips, he passed away. How fascinating. One final Jesus is sent to the people to pronounce daily unending woe upon them, right up until the armies are actually surrounding the city. I will not read the rest of this because we already saw this one by Tacitus earlier on, but I will read this particular one. So Titus, the Roman general who destroyed Jerusalem, Titus reportedly refused to accept a wreath of victory, because in the ancient times, whenever an emperor or a general would destroy a city, whenever they went back home, they would receive a wreath that they would put on their head as a victor. You know, remember Paul talks about the crown of victory. So Titus reportedly, when he went back to Rome, refused a wreath of victory, saying that the victory did not come from his own efforts, but that he had merely served as an instrument of God's wrath. This is from Philostratus, the life of Apollonius of Tyana. It is beyond amazing that Josephus, an unbelieving Jewish historian, would record these signs from God that preceded the ultimate destruction of Jerusalem and the very end of the Jewish age. And it is also significant that the day that the temple was destroyed in AD 70 was the same exact day and month that the previous Jewish temple was destroyed in 587 BC. This was no coincidence. This was an emphatic statement that God had brought an end to the outward signs and fulfilled them all in Christ. The day of the Lord, prophesied all throughout the Old Testament scriptures and also confirmed by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, was totally and completely fulfilled in AD 70 when the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, ended the animal sacrifice, and disbanded the Levitical priesthood. Today, the followers of Christ are now the new living temple of God, which is made up of priests who offer themselves as living sacrifices to God. If you want to read more about the end times prophecy and the return of Christ, you can go to this particular article that is referenced here. So that brings us to the end of the historical records that were recorded and are part of history about how Jesus came back the second time. So the next time you hear somebody telling you it could not have happened because nobody recorded it, please either refer them to this video or refer them to this book or refer them to this book or refer them to this book, The Days of Vengeance by David Chilton. So there is enough writings that are considered to be reasonable and reliable that prove that Jesus Christ came the second time when he said, and when the scripture said he would come the second time. And so I bid you adieu at that, and I hope that you have been blessed and that you continue to be blessed. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send them to me. Let me see if I actually have banners in this. Captions. Yes, I do have them here. I'd forgotten to put it. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see now scrolling the ways to contact me. My phone number is there, my email is there, and you can use the same also for giving and so on and so forth. So thank you very much. God bless you abundantly in the name of the Lord.